Eleanor's hand shot out and struck the crystal vase. It crashed to the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. She spun toward Grace, finger jabbing the air like a weapon. "You did this. You hear me? One word to Mr. Caldwell, and I'll destroy everything you've built for that boy of yours. I'll make sure you never work again, not here, not anywhere." Grace stood frozen, her cleaning rag dripping onto the shattered glass. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, Mrs. Crane, I didn't touch it. You know I didn't." "Shut your mouth." Eleanor stepped closer, close enough that Grace could smell her cold perfume. "Get outside. Sit in that rain until I decide what happens to you. And if you even think about running, remember this, I know where your son goes to school." What happens next will change everything you think you know about power, silence, and the courage it takes to stand up when the whole world tells you to stay down. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow Grace's journey to the very end. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now let us begin. The rain came down hard that October evening in Connecticut, the kind of cold autumn rain that soaks through everything and settles deep into your bones. Grace Thompson had been working at the Caldwell estate for 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days. She knew because she counted every single one of them. Each day was another step toward Elijah's future. Each day was another dollar saved, another bill paid, another inch closer to giving her son the life he deserved. She was 34 years old with hands that told the story of a lifetime of work, rough palms from years of scrubbing, cracked knuckles that ached in the cold, nails cut short because long nails got in the way of polishing silver and cleaning windows. But those hands had also held her newborn son 7 years ago. Those hands had worked 2 jobs while putting herself through night school. Those hands had built a life from nothing. Grace had grown up in Bridgeport in a 2-room apartment with her mother and 3 sisters. Her father had left when she was 6, walked out one morning for cigarettes, and never came back. Her mother had worked herself to death, literally collapsing from a heart attack at 47, while cleaning rooms at a hotel in Hartford. Grace had been 19 when her mother died. She remembered standing at the funeral, looking at the cheap casket, and making a promise. Her children would never know that kind of struggle. Her children would have choices. Her children would have a future. Now she had Elijah, 7 years old, with his father's smile and his mother's determination. He wanted to be a doctor, a heart doctor, specifically because he said he wanted to fix broken hearts so other kids wouldn't lose their mamas like Grace had lost hers. Every morning, Grace woke at 4:30. She made Elijah's lunch, laid out his school clothes, and left a note on the refrigerator telling him she loved him. Then she caught the 5:15 bus to the Caldwell estate where she worked until 2. After that, she took another bus to the diner on Route 7, where she waitressed until 9. She got home by 10, checked Elijah's homework, kissed him goodnight, and collapsed into bed for 5 hours before doing it all again. It was exhausting. It was relentless. But it was working. Elijah was thriving. His grades were excellent. His asthma was under control mostly. And every month Grace put a little money aside for his college fund. Not much, but something. Enough to keep the dream alive. The Caldwell estate was her morning job, and it was the better of her 2 positions. The pay was decent, the work was hard but predictable, and most importantly, it gave her access to a world she never could have imagined growing up in Bridgeport. 400,000 square feet of old money and older secrets, marble floors that needed daily polishing, crystal chandeliers that collected dust like memories, silk curtains that cost more than Grace's annual salary. It was beautiful and terrifying, and completely alien to everything she had ever known. But there was Eleanor Crane. Eleanor had been the head housekeeper at the Caldwell estate for 16 years. She was 55 years old with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything and approve of nothing. She ran the household staff with military precision, and she had made it clear from Grace's first day that certain people belonged in certain places. Grace had learned early that survival at the Caldwell estate meant one thing: stay invisible. Do your work, Keep your head down. Never ever draw attention to yourself. Smile when Eleanor criticized you. Apologize even when you did nothing wrong. Accept the blame for things you didn't do, because fighting back only made things worse. But that afternoon, everything changed. It started in the East Corridor, the long hallway near the formal dining room, where the Caldwell family's most precious heirlooms were displayed. Grace had been assigned to dust the display cabinet, a task she had done dozens of times without incident. She was reaching for the top shelf when she heard footsteps behind her. Soft, deliberate, predatory. She knew who it was before she turned around. "You missed a spot," Eleanor said. Grace turned to respond. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Crane. I'll get it right away." That's when Eleanor moved. It happened so fast that Grace barely registered it. Eleanor's elbow caught the pedestal where the crystal vase sat, a priceless heirloom that had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations. The vase wobbled once, twice, and then it fell. The sound of it shattering echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Hundreds of crystal fragments scattered across the marble floor, catching the afternoon light and throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. Grace's heart stopped. She stared at the destruction, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything but stand there, with her dust rag hanging limply in her hand. Eleanor stood perfectly still for one long, terrible moment. Her face registered genuine shock, maybe even fear. But then something shifted behind her eyes. The fear melted away, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Well," Eleanor said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "look what you've done." "Mrs. Crane," Grace's voice shook. "I didn't touch it. You hit the pedestal. I saw you." "Did you?" Eleanor tilted her head, studying Grace like a cat studying a mouse. "That's interesting, because I don't remember hitting anything. What I remember is you reaching too far, losing your balance, knocking over a priceless family heirloom. That's not what happened. Isn't it?" Eleanor stepped closer, and Grace instinctively stepped back. "Let me explain something to you, Grace. Something you should have learned a long time ago. In this house, truth is whatever I say it is. And right now, the truth is that you broke that vase." Grace felt her hands trembling. She pressed them against her apron, trying to steady herself. "I won't lie for you." Eleanor laughed. It was a soft, elegant sound, completely at odds with the cruelty in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to lie. You just have to stay quiet. There's a difference. I'll tell Mr. Caldwell what really happened. Will you?" Eleanor's smile widened. "Let me paint you a picture of how that conversation will go. You, a housekeeper who's been here for 2 years, will accuse me, the woman who's run this household for 16 years, of breaking a vase and blaming you for it. You have no proof, no witnesses, nothing but your word against mine." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And when Mr. Caldwell asks me what happened, I'll tell him that you've been problematic for months, that you've been cutting corners on your work, that I've caught you stealing food from the kitchen." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "That I found silverware in your bag last week, but didn't report it because I felt sorry for you." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "That's a lie. I've never stolen anything in my life." "I know you haven't." Eleanor's tone was almost gentle now, almost sympathetic. "But no one else knows that. And once I plant that seed, it won't matter what really happened. The only thing people will remember is that Grace Thompson, the poor single mother from Bridgeport, got caught stealing from the Caldwell family." Grace's legs felt weak. She reached out to steady herself against the wall. "Think about your son," Eleanor continued. "Elijah, isn't it, the little boy who wants to be a doctor? Such big dreams, such a bright future. It would be a shame if his mother's reputation ruined his chances before he even got started. Don't you dare bring my son into this. I'm not bringing him into anything. You are." Eleanor's voice hardened. "Every choice you make affects that child, so think very carefully about what you're going to say when Mr. Caldwell gets home tonight." Grace stood there trembling, her mind racing through possibilities. She could fight. She could scream the truth from the rooftops. She could refuse to back down. But then, what Eleanor was right. It was her word against a woman who had been trusted by the Caldwell family for 16 years. A woman who controlled every aspect of the household staff. A woman who could destroy Grace's reputation with a single phone call. And Elijah. Elijah. What would happen to him if Grace lost both her jobs? How would she pay for his inhalers, his school supplies, his food? How long before they ended up on the street? "What do you want me to do?" Grace heard herself ask. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Eleanor smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Grace had ever seen. "Right now, I want you to go outside. There's an old oak tree at the edge of the garden. You'll wait there until I send for you. I need time to prepare my report for Mr. Caldwell." Grace looked toward the window. Rain was lashing against the glass, driven by a fierce October wind. "But it's storming." "Yes." Eleanor's smile widened. "It is." Grace stood there for a long moment, weighing her options. But there were no options. There was only survival. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll wait outside." "Good girl." Eleanor patted her cheek, a gesture so condescending that Grace wanted to scream. "And remember, dear, silence is safer than unemployment." Grace walked through the servants' entrance and stepped into the storm. The rain hit her like a physical force, soaking through her thin uniform within seconds. The wind whipped her hair across her face and tore at her clothes. She made her way across the garden, her shoes squelching in the mud, until she reached the old oak tree. It offered minimal shelter, its branches too bare to block the rain, but at least it gave her something to lean against. She sank down onto the wet ground, her back against the rough bark, and wrapped her arms around her knees. In her pocket, she had her lunchbox. A small plastic container with rice and beans, the same lunch she had been eating for months because it was cheap and filling. She had been saving it for the bus ride home, but now she opened it because she didn't know what else to do with her shaking hands. The rice was already getting soggy from the rain. The beans looked sad and cold. But Grace ate anyway, mechanically spooning food into her mouth without tasting it because eating was something normal. Eating was something she could control. Inside the mansion, Eleanor was already at work. She found Carla first. The young maid was folding towels in the laundry room, humming softly to herself. "Carla, dear," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Have you seen Grace?" Carla looked up. "Not since this morning. Is everything okay?" Eleanor sighed heavily, the sigh of a woman burdened with terrible news. "I'm afraid there's been an incident. The Caldwell heirloom vase, the crystal one in the East Corridor, it's been destroyed." Carla's eyes widened. "Oh no, that was Mrs. Caldwell's favorite piece." "I know." Eleanor shook her head sadly. "I found Grace standing over it. She was alone in the corridor. When I asked what happened, she couldn't give me a straight answer. She just kept making excuses." "That doesn't sound like Grace. She's always so careful." Eleanor's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of annoyance quickly suppressed. "I know she seems that way, but I've noticed things over the past few months. She's been cutting corners, getting sloppy, walking through rooms she has no business being in." She lowered her voice confidentially. "Between you and me, I've suspected for a while that she's been taking food from the kitchen. I never said anything because I felt sorry for her. The single mother struggling to make ends meet." Another sigh. "But this is too much. I'll have to report it to Mr. Caldwell." Carla bit her lip. "Poor Grace. What's going to happen to her?" "That's not for me to decide." Eleanor placed a comforting hand on Carla's shoulder. "But if Mr. Caldwell asks you about her work performance, I hope you'll be honest." She moved on to Janet next, then Rosa, then the other staff members. Each conversation was carefully calibrated, each seed of doubt precisely planted. By the time Marcus Caldwell's car pulled into the driveway, Eleanor had constructed an entire narrative of Grace's incompetence and dishonesty. Meanwhile, in the gardener's cottage at the far end of the property, Henry Morrison sat in front of his security monitors with a cup of cold coffee and a growing sense of horror. At 65, Henry had worked at the Caldwell estate longer than anyone. He had started as a young groundskeeper when Marcus's grandfather was still alive. He had watched 3 generations of the family grow up, marry, have children, and die. He had seen the estate transform from a warm family home into something colder and more calculated. And for 16 years, he had watched Eleanor Crane operate. It had started small, a maid dismissed for alleged theft that Henry never quite believed, a cook fired for attitude problems that no one else had witnessed, a gardener's assistant who suddenly quit after a private conversation with Eleanor. Henry had kept his suspicions to himself because he was old and tired and didn't want trouble. But 3 months ago, something had changed. He had been repairing a broken sprinkler head near the east corridor when he heard Eleanor speaking to one of the newer maids. The conversation had chilled him to the bone. Threats, intimidation, the promise of destruction if the girl didn't follow Eleanor's instructions to the letter. That night, Henry had installed a backup security camera outside the east corridor. A small hidden camera that fed directly to his cottage. He hadn't known what he was looking for. He just knew he needed to see the truth. Now he had it. He watched the footage 3 times, his weathered hands gripping the edge of his desk. Eleanor's elbow striking the pedestal, the vase falling, Grace's shocked face, and then Eleanor's expression transforming, shifting from fear to calculation, to cold, deliberate accusation. 40 years, Henry muttered to himself. 40 years I've worked for this family, and I let this happen under my nose. He saved the footage to a USB drive and wrapped it in a plastic bag. His hands were shaking, but not from his arthritis. He was shaking with rage. Through his window he could see Grace still sitting under the oak tree. The rain had soaked her completely. She looked small and broken, like a bird that had fallen from its nest. Henry thought about his own daughter who had died of cancer 10 years ago. He thought about the grandchildren he never got to meet. He thought about all the times he had stayed silent when he should have spoken up. Not this time. He pulled on his rain jacket and stepped out into the storm. Under the oak tree, Grace had lost track of time. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but she was already soaked through. Her uniform clung to her body like a second skin. Her hair hung in wet ropes around her face. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. She thought about Elijah. Right now, he would be at after-school care, probably sitting at one of those little tables with his science workbook open in front of him. He loved science, especially biology. He knew the names of all the bones in the human body, all the major organs, even some of the smaller blood vessels. Last week, he had come home from school with a permission slip for a field trip to the Yale Medical School. The cost was $40. Grace had signed it without hesitation, even though $40 was almost half of what she made in a day at the diner. What would happen to him if she lost this job? The math was brutal. Without the Caldwell salary, she would fall behind on rent within a month. Elijah's inhalers cost $200 each, and he needed a new one every 6 weeks. The after-school care program was another $200 a month. Food, electricity, bus fare. Within 2 months, they would be on the street. "Mama can't fail you," Grace whispered into the rain. I promised I'd give you a better life." But even as she said the words, she felt the weight of Eleanor's threat pressing down on her chest. The woman had won. There was nothing Grace could do. No one she could turn to. No way out. She closed her eyes and let the rain wash over her face, mixing with the tears. She finally allowed herself to cry. Inside the mansion, Marcus Caldwell's Bentley pulled into the circular driveway. He had been in meetings all day, tedious discussions about investment portfolios and corporate restructuring. His shoulders ached. His head throbbed. All he wanted was a hot shower, a glass of bourbon, and silence. Marcus was 38 years old, and he had been running the Caldwell family business for 5 years. People called him cold, calculating, a man who treated everything like a business transaction. The financial magazines loved to profile him as the Ice King of Connecticut, the billionaire who never smiled, never showed emotion, never let anyone get close. They weren't entirely wrong. Marcus had learned early that emotions were dangerous. His father had taught him that lesson before abandoning the family when Marcus was 12. One day, Marcus came home from school to find his mother crying in the kitchen. His father's closet was empty. His drawers were cleaned out. There was no note, no explanation, no goodbye. For weeks, Marcus had waited for his father to come back. He left the porch light on every night. He checked the mailbox every day. He jumped every time the phone rang, but his father never returned, never called, never wrote. It was as if Marcus and his mother simply ceased to exist for him. Marcus's mother had been devastated, but she never let her son see it. Elizabeth Caldwell was a woman of extraordinary strength and dignity. She threw herself into charity work, into managing the estate, into being both mother and father to her only child. She had also taught Marcus the most important lesson of his life: never give anyone the power to hurt you. Build walls. Keep people at a distance. Trust no one with your heart, because hearts are fragile things, and people will break them without a second thought. Marcus had followed her advice religiously. He had built walls so high and so thick that nothing could penetrate them. He had romantic relationships that never lasted more than a few months. He had business partners but no real friends. He had employees but no confidants. It was lonely. It was empty. But it was safe. Then his mother got cancer. Pancreatic cancer stage 4, discovered too late to treat. She had been hiding her symptoms for months, not wanting to worry him, not wanting to be a burden. By the time they found it, the cancer had spread everywhere. She died on a Tuesday afternoon in April, with Marcus holding her hand and trying not to cry. Her last words were about him. "Don't close yourself off completely," she had whispered. "I taught you to protect your heart, but I didn't mean for you to kill it. Promise me you'll let someone in someday. Promise me you'll find something worth fighting for." He had promised. But in the 5 years since her death, he had done nothing but retreat further into his fortress of isolation. He worked. He made money. He attended charity events and board meetings and tedious dinner parties. And every night, he came home to an empty mansion full of memories he couldn't escape. Eleanor Crane ran the household, and Marcus was grateful for it. She was efficient and discreet and never asked personal questions. She kept the staff in line and the estate running smoothly and allowed Marcus to focus on his work without being bothered by domestic concerns. He trusted her completely, which was why when his car pulled up to the house and he saw a figure sitting under the oak tree in the rain, his first thought was confusion rather than concern. "What the hell?" he muttered, squinting through the water-streaked windshield. It was definitely a woman. One of the staff, judging by the blue uniform. She was hunched over, holding something in her lap, completely drenched. Marcus threw open the car door and strode toward her, not bothering with an umbrella. The rain immediately plastered his expensive suit to his body, but he barely noticed. None of this made any sense. "Hey!" he shouted over the rain. "What are you doing out here?" The woman looked up, and Marcus felt something strange twist in his chest. She was young, maybe mid-30s, with dark skin and darker eyes. Her uniform clung to her body, and he could see she was shivering violently. But what struck him most wasn't her appearance. It was her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't even anger. It was acceptance, resignation. The look of someone who had stopped expecting anything good to happen. Marcus had seen that expression before, in the mirror, every day for the past 5 years. "Grace," he said, suddenly recognizing her. She was one of the housemaids, quiet, efficient, always disappearing into the background. He couldn't remember the last time he had actually looked at her. "Grace, what the hell are you doing out here? You're soaking wet." She flinched at his voice, snapping the lid of her plastic lunchbox shut with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "She shouldn't even be here, sir." Marcus turned sharply. Eleanor had appeared behind him, gliding across the wet grass under a black umbrella like some kind of dark angel. Her voice was calm, measured, perfectly composed. "I was just about to report her," Eleanor continued smoothly. "There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Eleanor sighed, lowering her gaze with practiced regret. "I found her standing over the broken Caldwell heirloom vase this afternoon. The crystal one from your grandmother's collection. I'm afraid it's completely destroyed." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His grandmother's vase, his mother's favorite piece in the entire house. She used to fill it with fresh flowers every Sunday. Even when she was too sick to climb the stairs, she would ask the staff to bring her flowers so she could arrange them herself. That vase was one of the last connections Marcus had to his mother. He spun back toward Grace, his voice hardening. "You broke it." "I didn't, sir." Grace's voice cracked, but she held his gaze. Her dark eyes were steady, unflinching. "I was cleaning the hallway when Mrs. Crane—" "She's lying," Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp. "I found her alone near the display case. There was no one else there. I tried to reason with her, but she refused to take responsibility." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Is that true? Were you alone in the corridor?" Grace's eyes darted to Eleanor, and Marcus saw something flash across her face. Fear, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like a warning. "Sir, please." Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. "If you'll just listen. She's been careless for weeks." Eleanor continued, speaking over Grace as if she weren't even there. "I warned her she wasn't fit for delicate work. Some people simply don't have the temperament for fine things. It's not their fault, really. It's just how they were raised." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Grace's head shot up, her eyes flashing. "That's not true. You told me to polish the display cabinet. You said—" "Enough!" Marcus's voice thundered through the rain, cutting off both women. The sudden outburst startled Grace so badly that she stumbled backward. Her heel slipped on the wet stone, and she fell hard, her palm scraping against the rough gravel. The lunchbox tumbled from her hand, spilling soggy rice and beans across the muddy ground. Blood welled from her scraped palm, mixing with the rainwater into pink rivulets that ran down her wrist. But she didn't cry out. She didn't sob. She just looked up at Marcus, with those dark, steady eyes, now glistening with something between shame and heartbreak. "I didn't do it," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but her words were clear. "I know you have no reason to believe me. I know Mrs. Crane has worked for you for years, and I'm nobody. But I'm telling you the truth. I did not break that vase." Marcus stood over her, his chest heaving with anger and confusion. The rain poured down around them, and he could feel the cold seeping into his bones. Behind him, Eleanor's expression remained perfectly composed. Her voice was silky when she spoke. "You see, sir. She won't take responsibility. She'd rather lie than admit her mistake. It's sad, really. I tried to give her a chance." Grace turned toward the housekeeper, desperation flashing in her eyes. "You know that's not what happened. You were there. You hit the pedestal. You—" She stopped mid-sentence, her breath hitching. Eleanor's cold eyes met hers, and the older woman's lips curved into the faintest smile. A warning. A threat. A promise of destruction if Grace said another word. Grace swallowed hard and looked away. Marcus ran a hand through his soaked hair, exhaling sharply. His mind was spinning. The vase was broken. His mother's memory was shattered on the floor. Someone had to be responsible, and Eleanor had never lied to him. Not once in 16 years. "I don't want to hear another word tonight," he finally said. His voice was flat, exhausted. "Clean this up. We'll discuss it tomorrow." He turned and walked toward the house, his shoulders rigid with tension. Behind him, Eleanor nodded obediently. "Of course, sir. I'll see that she tidies the mess." Grace pressed her bleeding hand against her apron and whispered, "Yes, sir." Her voice was barely audible over the rain. Marcus made it all the way to the front door before he stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. Maybe it was the way her voice had sounded so small and defeated. Maybe it was the image of that spilled lunchbox, such a humble meal, scattered in the mud like garbage. Or maybe it was something he had seen out of the corner of his eye. Just for a second as he turned away, he had caught Eleanor's expression. A smile. Satisfied. Triumphant. The smile of someone who had just won a game that no one else knew was being played. Marcus frowned. He shook his head. He was tired. He was imagining things. He went inside. In his study, Marcus poured himself a bourbon and stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. He had changed out of his wet clothes, but the chill of guilt lingered on his skin like a stubborn stain. He replayed the scene in his mind. Grace's trembling voice. Her bleeding hand. The rice and beans scattered in the mud. Rice and beans. That was her lunch. That was what she had been eating alone in the rain while the storm raged around her. Why hadn't she gone inside? The question nagged at him. If she had broken the vase and been caught, why wouldn't Eleanor have simply sent her home? Why make her sit outside in a storm, like some kind of punishment? And why had Grace stopped mid-sentence when she started to accuse Eleanor? What had she seen in the housekeeper's eyes that made her swallow her words? Marcus walked to the window. Rain still streaked the glass, blurring the view of the garden. But through the distortion, he could just make out a dark shape under the oak tree. She was still there. "Damn it," he muttered, his breath fogging the cold glass. "Why is she still out there?" A soft knock at the door made him turn. "Come in." It was Henry, the old gardener. The man was soaked from head to toe, his cloth cap dripping rain onto the expensive Persian rug. His weathered face was set with determination, and in his calloused hand he held a small object wrapped in a plastic bag. "Sir," Henry said quietly, glancing toward the window, "I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but I think you should see this before you make any decisions about Miss Thompson." Marcus frowned. "What is it?" Henry hesitated. His jaw worked for a moment as if he were chewing on words he wasn't sure how to say. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Security footage, sir. I installed a backup camera outside the east corridor by the dining hall about 3 months ago." "Why would you do that without telling me?" Henry met his eyes directly. "Because I've watched good people disappear from this house for 16 years, Mr. Caldwell. Good, hard-working people who suddenly weren't here anymore. And Mrs. Crane's explanations were always so perfect, so smooth. Never any witnesses, never any evidence. Just her word, and then someone was gone." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I had suspicions, sir, and tonight those suspicions were confirmed." Henry extended the USB drive. "She broke the vase herself. Then she blamed Miss Thompson. I saw the whole thing." The room went utterly still. Even the fire seemed to quiet its crackling, reduced to a soft whisper. Marcus slowly took the USB, his hand tightening around it. "You're absolutely certain?" "I've worked for your family for 40 years, sir. I watched your mother in this house. I was here the day you were born. I would never bring you something like this unless I was completely sure." Henry paused, his voice dropping even lower. "And that's not all. She's been bullying that girl for months, making her work double shifts, screaming at her when you're not around, taking credit for her work and blaming her for mistakes she didn't make. Tonight she threatened to destroy Miss Thompson's life. Said she'd tell you Grace was stealing. Said she'd make sure she never worked again." His weathered hands trembled slightly. "I've kept my mouth shut for too long, Mr. Caldwell. But watching that young woman sit in the rain bleeding while Mrs. Crane smiled," he shook his head. "Your mother would never have tolerated this, and neither should you." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at the small drive in his palm. It felt heavier than gold. Heavier than his grandmother's broken vase. Heavier than all the assumptions he had made in the past hour. "Thank you, Henry," he said quietly. "That will be all for tonight." The old gardener nodded and turned to leave. At the door he paused. "That woman out there, Grace, she's got a little boy, 7 years old, wants to be a doctor. She works 2 jobs to give him a fighting chance." He looked back at Marcus, and there was something ancient and knowing in his eyes. "Some people deserve better than what this house has given them, sir. I hope you'll remember that." When the door closed behind Henry, Marcus sank into his chair. For a long moment, he just sat there staring at the USB drive in his hand, listening to the rain against the windows. Then he plugged it into his laptop and clicked on the only video file. The footage was grainy but clear enough. He could see Eleanor walking briskly past the display case. She paused, adjusted something on her uniform, and then turned abruptly. Her elbow caught the pedestal. Marcus leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. The vase wobbled, tipped, fell, shattered. Eleanor's face went through a rapid transformation: shock, fear, and then something else. Something cold and calculating. Grace entered the frame seconds later, her body language hesitant, confused. She looked at the broken glass on the floor, then at Eleanor, and her expression was pure bewilderment. Eleanor's posture changed instantly. She stepped toward Grace, her body language aggressive, accusatory. Though there was no sound, her finger jabbed the air, pointing at Grace, pointing at the broken glass. Marcus watched Grace shake her head, watched her mouth the words, "I didn't do it." Watched Eleanor step even closer, crowding into Grace's space, her face inches away. Then Eleanor grabbed Grace's arm and started pulling her not toward the main house, but toward the back entrance, toward the garden, toward the storm. The timestamp read 5:47 p.m. Marcus glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was 8:23 p.m. Over 2.5 hours. She had been sitting outside in the storm for over 2.5 hours. He paused the video at the moment when Eleanor's finger was jabbing toward Grace's face. The older woman's expression was triumphant, cruel, utterly convinced of her own power. And Grace's face. God, Grace's face. She looked like someone watching their entire world collapse. Like someone who knew exactly what was happening and was completely powerless to stop it. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart exactly, but something close to it. The walls he had built so carefully over the years. The fortress of isolation that had protected him for so long. How long had this been happening under his roof? How many other staff members had Eleanor driven away with her lies and threats? How many lives had she damaged while he sat in his office, signing checks and reviewing reports, completely blind to the cruelty being carried out in his name? He thought about his mother. Elizabeth Caldwell had been many things. Strong, proud, sometimes cold. But she had never been cruel. She had treated the staff with respect and dignity. She had known their names, their families, their stories. What would she think if she could see what her home had become? Marcus closed the laptop and stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the wooden floor. Without thinking, he grabbed an umbrella from the stand by the door and walked out into the night. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, but the air was still cold, still carrying the bitter weight of the storm. Security lights along the pathway flickered to life as he walked, casting long shadows across the wet grass. The oak tree stood dark against the gray sky, its branches bare and reaching upward like arms raised in surrender. Grace hadn't moved. She was still sitting there, her back against the trunk, her legs folded to one side. Her uniform was soaked through, plastered against her body. Blood had dried dark on her palm, mixing with the mud on her hands. The ruined lunchbox lay beside her, closed now, but clearly destroyed beyond saving. She didn't look up as he approached. Her eyes were focused on something far away, something only she could see. Only when his shadow fell across her, blocking what little light filtered from the house, did she lift her gaze. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were dry now. Empty. The eyes of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Grace," Marcus said. Her voice came out rusty, barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." "You're hurt." She glanced down at her hand as if noticing it for the first time. "It's nothing." Marcus took a deep breath. The words felt like broken glass in his throat, sharp and painful to push out. But they needed to be said. "I was wrong." Grace blinked. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. "I watched the footage," Marcus continued. "The security camera outside the dining corridor. I saw everything." Her breath caught. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Eleanor broke the vase. She blamed you. She pushed you out here." He paused, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "And I believed her without even listening to you. I'm sorry." The words hung between them in the cold air. Grace stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "You watched the footage," she repeated slowly. "There was a camera. Henry installed it. He saw everything. He brought it to me." Something shifted in Grace's expression. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The first crack in the wall of resignation she had built around herself. "I tried to tell you," she said quietly. "I tried to explain what happened." "I know." Marcus's voice softened. "And I didn't listen. I'm sorry." Grace looked down at her hands, at the blood dried on her palm, at the mud caked under her fingernails. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why would she do this? I never did anything to her. I worked hard. I followed all the rules. I never complained, never caused trouble. I just—" Her voice cracked. "I just wanted to keep my job. I just wanted to take care of my son." Marcus didn't have an answer for her. He didn't understand Eleanor's cruelty any more than Grace did. Maybe some people were just broken inside. Maybe power corrupted even the smallest souls. Maybe Eleanor had been fighting her own battles for so long that she had forgotten how to do anything but destroy. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the woman sitting in front of him, shivering and bleeding and completely alone. "I'm not going to ask why you didn't fight back," Marcus said, "because I think I already know." Grace lifted her head slightly. "You were afraid," he continued. "You've probably had to be afraid for a long time. Afraid of losing your job. Afraid of not being believed. Afraid of someone like me not caring." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Maybe she had used up all her tears years ago. Or maybe she had learned that crying didn't change anything. "I won't make that mistake again," Marcus said. "I promise you that." He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She hesitated, her hands trembling, and then she clutched it tightly around herself. It was absurdly large on her, swallowing her small frame, but she pulled it close like a shield. "Come inside," Marcus said. "Let me take care of your hand. I don't want to cause any more trouble." "There's no more trouble to cause. Eleanor is finished here, effective immediately." Grace stared at him. "What?" "I'm going to make sure she never works in another household again. What she did to you, the lies, the threats, the cruelty, it ends tonight. All of it." Grace's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like someone who had just been told they had won the lottery after spending years convinced they would never hold a winning ticket. "And you," Marcus continued, "you won't sit out here in the rain again. Ever. I promise you that." He extended his hand toward her. For a long moment, Grace just looked at it. Her eyes moved from his hand to his face and back again, searching for the trap, the trick, the catch that surely had to be there. People like Marcus Caldwell didn't help people like Grace Thompson. That wasn't how the world worked. That wasn't how anything worked. But his hand remained extended, steady and patient, waiting for her to make a choice. Slowly, carefully, Grace placed her injured hand in his. Marcus helped her to her feet. As they walked back toward the house together, the rain finally stopped. The clouds began to break apart, revealing patches of star-filled sky. And somewhere in the distance, a clock began to chime the hour. Grace Thompson had survived the storm. But she didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. Inside the house, a confrontation was waiting. A housekeeper's empire was about to crumble, and a billionaire's heart was about to discover something it had forgotten existed. The truth. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Grace sat on a wooden stool near the center island, her wet uniform dripping onto the tile floor. Marcus stood across from her, carefully unwrapping a first aid kit he had found in the cabinet. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence was heavy, filled with everything that had happened in the past few hours and everything that was about to come. Marcus took her injured hand, gently turning it over to examine the scrape. The wound wasn't deep, but it was ugly, the skin torn and embedded with tiny pieces of gravel. He began cleaning it with antiseptic, his movements careful and precise. Grace winced, but didn't pull away. "I didn't know you had a son," Marcus said quietly, not looking up from his work. Grace's breath caught. "How did you—" "Henry told me. He said the boy wants to be a doctor." She nodded slowly, her eyes softening despite everything. "Elijah. He's 7. He wants to be a heart doctor specifically. Says he wants to fix broken hearts so other kids don't lose their mamas." Marcus's hands paused for just a moment. Then he continued wrapping the bandage around her palm. "That's a big dream for a little boy." "He's a big dreamer." Grace's voice cracked slightly. "That's why I work 2 jobs. That's why I put up with—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "With Eleanor." Marcus finished for her. Grace didn't answer. She didn't have to. Marcus tied off the bandage and looked at her directly for the first time since they had come inside. "How long has this been going on?" "The bullying." Grace let out a hollow laugh. "Since my first week. She didn't like me from the moment I walked through the door. I never understood why. I did everything she asked. I worked harder than anyone else. I never complained, never talked back, never gave her any reason to—" "It wasn't about reasons." Marcus's voice was flat. "Some people don't need reasons. They just need targets." Grace looked at him, surprised by the bitterness in his tone. "My father was like that?" Marcus continued, his jaw tightening. "He didn't need a reason to be cruel. He just was. One day he was there, and the next day he was gone, and my mother spent years wondering what she did wrong." He shook his head. "She didn't do anything wrong. That's the thing about people like that. They make you think it's your fault, but it never is." Grace stared at him. In all her time at the estate, she had never heard Marcus Caldwell speak about anything personal. He was a ghost who signed paychecks and occasionally walked through the hallways. She had assumed he was cold, distant, incapable of feeling. She was beginning to realize she had been wrong. "I'm sorry about your father," she said softly. "I'm sorry about Eleanor." He met her eyes. "But I'm going to fix it. Tonight." The words hung in the air between them. Grace felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been hope if she still remembered what hope felt like. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I can just leave. Find another job. I don't want to cause problems for you." "You're not causing problems. Eleanor caused problems. For years, apparently, and I was too blind to see it." Marcus stood up, his expression hardening. "That ends now." He walked to the intercom panel on the wall and pressed a button. His voice was calm but carried an edge that Grace had never heard before. "Mrs. Crane, please come to the main office. Immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Grace's heart began to pound. "Maybe I should go. I don't think I should be here when—" "Stay." Marcus turned to face her. "I want you to hear this. I want you to see that what she did has consequences. You deserve that much." Grace wanted to argue. Every instinct she had developed over years of survival told her to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible. But something in Marcus's eyes made her stay. Something that looked almost like respect. 5 minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Measured. Confident. The footsteps of someone who had no idea their world was about to collapse. Eleanor Crane entered the kitchen. She was wearing a fresh dress, her hair perfectly arranged, her expression composed. If she was surprised to see Grace sitting there with a bandaged hand and Marcus's coat still draped over her shoulders, she didn't show it. You called Mr. Caldwell. Her voice was smooth as silk. We need to talk. Follow me to the study. Eleanor's eyes flicked to Grace for just a moment. A warning, a threat. But Grace held her gaze this time. She didn't look away. Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Uncertainty. Just for a second, but it was there. The three of them walked in silence to Marcus's study. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Marcus gestured for Eleanor to sit in the chair facing his desk. She sat crossing her ankles primly, folding her hands in her lap like a woman at church. Marcus didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, his laptop open in front of him. I've seen the footage, he said. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. Footage? The security camera outside the east corridor. Henry installed it 3 months ago. Marcus's voice was cold. You didn't know about it. For the first time, a crack appeared in Eleanor's composure. Her smile faltered just for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Ah, that camera. I wasn't aware Henry had taken such initiative. No, you weren't. Marcus clicked the spacebar on his laptop. The screen lit up, and even from across the room, Grace could see the frozen image of Eleanor's elbow striking the pedestal. I watched you break the vase, Marcus continued. I watched you blame Grace. I watched you grab her arm and push her toward the back door. His voice dropped lower. I watched you stand over her like she was nothing. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. The calculation. The reassessment. Grace could almost see her mind working, searching for an angle, an excuse, a way out. What would you like me to say? Eleanor asked finally. I'd like you to say why. The room went silent. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. And Eleanor Crane sat perfectly still, her mask beginning to slip. Why? She let out a small, elegant laugh. You want to know why I did what I did to her? Yes. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Gone was the smooth professional tone. In its place was something harder, colder, more honest. Because she doesn't belong here, Mr. Caldwell. She never did. From the moment she walked through that door, I could see it. The way she moved. The way she spoke. The way she looked at everything with those hungry eyes, like she was memorizing it, like she was planning something. Grace felt her stomach turn. I wasn't planning anything. I was just trying to do my job. Eleanor ignored her completely. People like her, Mr. Caldwell, they're dangerous. They come into houses like this, and they play quiet, play humble, play the victim. But underneath it all, they're watching, waiting, looking for weaknesses they can exploit. Marcus's jaw tightened. She's a single mother working 2 jobs to take care of her son. What exactly was she going to exploit? Your sympathy. Eleanor's voice was sharp now. Your guilt, your loneliness. She would have worked her way into your confidence, made herself indispensable, and before you knew it, she would have had her hooks in everything. I've seen it happen before. I've watched families destroyed by people who seemed harmless at first. So you destroyed her instead. Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. Preemptively, just in case. I protected this house. I protected this family. I protected you. Eleanor stood up, her composure cracking further. For 16 years, I've kept this estate running. I've handled problems you never even knew existed. I've maintained order, discipline standards. And this is the thanks I get, because you feel sorry for the help. She's not the help. Marcus's voice rose for the first time. She's a human being, with a name, with a family, with a life that you tried to destroy for no reason other than your own paranoid cruelty. Eleanor's face flushed. You don't understand. You've never understood. Your mother would have... Don't. Marcus's voice cut through the air like a knife. Don't you dare bring my mother into this. My mother would have been horrified by what you've done. She treated every person in this house with dignity. She knew their names, their families, their dreams. She would never have tolerated what you've become." Eleanor stood frozen, her mouth open, no words coming out. "You're finished here," Marcus said. "Pack your things. The driver will take you wherever you want to go, but your time at Caldwell Estate is over." "You can't do this." Eleanor's voice trembled now. "I've given 16 years to this family. 16 years of loyalty, of service, of bullying, of manipulation, of cruelty." Marcus stepped around the desk, standing directly in front of her. "How many people have you driven away, Eleanor? How many good, hardworking people lost their jobs because of your lies? How many families did you hurt while I sat in this office trusting you to run my household?" Eleanor had no answer. "Get out," Marcus said quietly, "and don't ever come back." For a long moment, Eleanor didn't move. Her eyes darted to Grace, filled with venom, with hatred, with the impotent rage of someone who had finally been caught. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Both of you. I know things about this family. Secrets. I could destroy you with a single phone call." Marcus smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Try it. I have 16 years of records, financial documents, staff complaints that mysteriously disappeared. You want to go to war with me, Eleanor? You'll lose, I promise you that." Eleanor's face went white. She stood there for another moment, trembling with fury, and then she turned and walked out of the study without another word. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway. A door slammed somewhere in the distance. And then silence. Grace sat frozen in her chair, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. She felt like she had just watched a mountain crumble. Marcus let out a long breath and turned to face her. The anger was draining from his face, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. "Are you okay?" he asked. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, to her horror, she started to cry. Not gentle tears, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she had kept locked away for years. Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words. He just pulled a chair close to hers and sat down waiting. "I'm sorry," Grace managed between sobs. "I don't know why I'm—" "Don't apologize." His voice was gentle. "You've been holding this in for a long time. Let it out." So she did. She cried for all the mornings she had woken up dreading work. For all the times Eleanor had humiliated her in front of the other staff. For all the nights she had gone home and smiled at Elijah, even though she wanted to scream. For her mother, who had worked herself to death in a world that never valued her. For herself, for the dreams she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. When the tears finally stopped, Grace felt hollow, but somehow lighter. Like a storm had passed through her and left the air cleaner. Marcus handed her a handkerchief. It was monogrammed with his initials, probably worth more than her weekly salary. She used it anyway. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For believing me, for listening." She looked at him. "No one's ever done that before. Not anyone like you." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "My mother asked me something before she died. She made me promise to let someone in someday, to find something worth fighting for." He paused. "I think maybe I understand what she meant now." Grace didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just sat there in the warmth of the fire, wearing a billionaire's coat, holding a monogrammed handkerchief, feeling for the first time in years like maybe, just maybe, things might be okay. The clock on the mantel chimed 11 times. "It's late," Marcus said. "Let me have the driver take you home." "I can take the bus. I don't want to be any more trouble." "Grace." He said her name firmly, like it meant something. "You are not trouble. You've never been trouble. And you're not taking the bus home tonight." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or condescension. She found neither, just determination. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." As she stood to leave, Marcus spoke again. "Come back tomorrow. Not to clean, to talk. I want to discuss your future here." Grace turned back confused. "My future. This house needs someone I can trust. Someone who sees things clearly. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth." He paused. "I think that person might be you." Grace stood there speechless. 24 hours ago, she had been a maid eating cold rice in a rainstorm, certain that her life was about to fall apart. Now she was standing in a billionaire's study being offered something she couldn't even name yet. "I'll be here," she said quietly. Marcus nodded once. "Good. Now go home to your son. Tell him his mother had a very long day." Grace smiled. It was small, uncertain, but real. The first real smile she had worn in longer than she could remember. "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." "Marcus," he corrected. "After everything that happened tonight, I think you've earned the right to use my first name." "Good night, Marcus." She walked out of the study through the hallway, past the shattered remains of Eleanor's empire, and into the waiting car. As the driver pulled away from the estate, Grace looked back at the house. The lights were still on in the study. She could see Marcus's silhouette standing by the window, watching the car disappear into the night. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if this fragile new reality would last. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. And somewhere in that massive house behind her, Marcus Caldwell stood alone, staring out at the darkness, realizing that the walls he had built around his heart had finally begun to crack. The next morning came faster than Grace expected. She had barely slept, lying awake in her small bed, replaying everything that had happened. Eleanor's face when Marcus confronted her. The sound of the door slamming. The weight of Marcus's coat on her shoulders. The way he had said her name like it mattered. At 6 o'clock her alarm went off. She silenced it and lay there for another moment, staring at the ceiling. Part of her wondered if it had all been a dream. Part of her was terrified to find out. Elijah appeared in her doorway, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mama, you okay?" Grace sat up and forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby, just tired." "You came home late last night. I heard the car." He padded across the room and climbed onto her bed, snuggling against her side. "Was it a fancy car?" Grace laughed softly. "It was pretty fancy, yes." "Did a prince bring you home?" "Not exactly." She kissed the top of his head. "But something good might be happening, Elijah. Something really good." He looked up at her with those big, trusting eyes. "Does that mean you don't have to work so much anymore?" The question hit her like a punch to the chest. She had never realized how much he noticed, how much he understood about their struggles even at 7 years old. "Maybe," she whispered. "We'll see." At 8 o'clock, Grace stood outside the Caldwell estate gates. She was wearing her best clothes, a simple blue dress she had bought at Goodwill 3 years ago, and her only pair of dress shoes. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she had even put on a little makeup, something she hadn't done in months. The security guard recognized her and waved her through without question. As she walked up the long driveway, her heart pounded harder with every step. What if Marcus had changed his mind? What if last night had been a moment of weakness and now he regretted everything? What if Eleanor had somehow convinced him that Grace was the problem after all? But when she reached the front door, it opened before she could knock. Marcus stood there dressed casually in a sweater and slacks, looking more human than she had ever seen him. "You came," he said. "You asked me to." He smiled slightly. "I wasn't sure you would. After everything that happened, I thought you might decide it was safer to stay away." "I thought about it," Grace admitted. "But then I realized something." "What?" "I've spent my whole life playing it safe, keeping my head down, not making waves." She met his eyes. "And where did it get me? Sitting in the rain, eating cold rice while someone else decided my fate. I'm tired of letting other people write my story. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Come in. We have a lot to discuss. They walked together through the hallway, past the east corridor, where the shattered vase had been cleaned away, leaving no trace of the previous day's destruction. Grace noticed that several staff members glanced at her as she passed. Some looked curious. Others looked confused. A few looked almost hopeful. Word had spread. Eleanor was gone. And somehow, Grace was still here. In the study, Marcus gestured for her to sit. But instead of taking his place behind the desk, he sat in the chair beside her. I want to be direct with you, he said. I've spent the last 12 hours thinking about what happened and what needs to change. This house has been running on fear and manipulation for far too long. Eleanor built a system where people were afraid to speak up, afraid to tell the truth, afraid to be themselves. That stops now. Grace nodded slowly. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Marcus leaned forward. I need someone I can trust. Someone who sees this house clearly without the politics and the games. Someone who understands what the staff goes through because she's lived it. You want me to be your spy? No. He shook his head firmly. I want you to be my partner. In running this household, I mean. I want you to help me rebuild what Eleanor destroyed. Grace stared at him. I'm a maid, Marcus. I clean floors and polish silver. I don't know anything about running an estate. You know more than you think. You know which staff members are struggling. You know who's being overworked. You know the problems that never make it to my desk because everyone's too scared to report them. He paused. And most importantly, you know what it feels like to be invisible. To be treated like you don't matter. I need someone who will never let that happen to anyone else. Grace's throat tightened. Why me? There must be dozens of people more qualified. Qualified people got me Eleanor. Marcus's voice hardened. I don't want qualified anymore. I want honest. I want real. I want someone who will tell me when I'm wrong, even if it's uncomfortable. He looked at her. Can you do that? Grace thought about all the times she had bitten her tongue, all the times she had swallowed her anger and her pride, all the times she had smiled when she wanted to scream. Yes, she said. I can do that. Good. Marcus stood and walked to his desk, picking up a folder. There's one more thing. My mother left a trust fund for the estate staff. It was supposed to provide education assistance, medical coverage, retirement support. But Eleanor suppressed it. She filed paperwork that made it disappear from the official records. Grace felt her blood run cold. She stole from the staff. Not directly, but she made sure they never received what was rightfully theirs. Henry has worked here for 40 years. He should have a pension waiting for him. Janet has been here for 25 years. Her daughter needed surgery last year, and Janet took out a loan to pay for it, a loan she's still paying off. Marcus's jaw tightened. That surgery should have been covered. Oh my God. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth. I found my mother's original will in Eleanor's quarters last night. She had hidden it. The version on file with the lawyers was altered. Marcus handed her the folder. I'm reinstating the trust, retroactively. Everyone who should have received benefits will get them, and I want you to help me tell them. Grace opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were names she recognized. People she had worked alongside for years. People who had struggled and sacrificed and never complained because they thought that was just how life worked. They don't know, she whispered. They have no idea what they were owed. They will, today. Marcus checked his watch. I've called a staff meeting for 10 o'clock. I want you standing beside me when I make the announcement. Grace looked up sharply. Beside you, Marcus, that's going to cause talk. People will think, let them think whatever they want. The truth is simple. You're the reason I found out about Eleanor. You're the reason I started asking questions. And you're going to be the face of change in this house. He paused. Unless you don't want that. Grace thought about Elijah, about his dreams of becoming a doctor, about all the sacrifices she had made to give him a chance. She thought about her mother working herself to death in hotel rooms, never asking for more because she didn't believe she deserved it. She thought about every person who had ever told her to be quiet, to be small, to be grateful for scraps. "I want it," she said quietly. "I want to be part of something that matters. Then let's go change some lives." At 10 o'clock, the staff gathered in the main hall. There were perhaps 30 people in total: housekeepers and cooks, gardeners and maintenance workers, drivers and security guards. They stood in clusters, whispering among themselves, casting nervous glances toward the front of the room where Marcus waited. Grace stood beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel the weight of their stares, the questions, the confusion, the suspicion. Henry caught her eye from the back of the room and gave her a small nod of encouragement. Carla stood near the front, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. Marcus raised his hand, and the whispers died away. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know there have been rumors about what happened last night. I want to address them directly." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Eleanor Crane is no longer employed at this estate. She was terminated last night for misconduct." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Several people exchanged shocked looks. "I won't go into the details of what she did, but I want you to know that her behavior was unacceptable, and it should have been stopped years ago. The fact that it wasn't is my failure. I trusted the wrong person, and many of you suffered because of it." Grace watched the faces around her. Some showed relief. Others showed skepticism. A few showed something that looked almost like fear, as if they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Things are going to be different now," Marcus continued. "Starting today, Grace Thompson will be working directly with me on household affairs. She will be your advocate. If you have concerns, if you have problems, if there's something you've been afraid to say, she is the person to talk to. And I promise you your voices will be heard." More murmurs, more exchanged glances. Grace felt her cheeks burning, but she kept her chin up. "There's something else." Marcus's voice softened. "My mother created a trust fund for the staff of this estate. It was meant to provide education assistance, medical coverage, and retirement benefits for anyone who worked here for more than 5 years. That trust was hidden from you. It was suppressed by Eleanor and never properly implemented." Dead silence. "I found the original documents last night, and I want you to know that every single person in this room who qualifies will receive everything they were owed, retroactively, starting immediately." For a moment, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then Janet let out a small sob. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter," she choked out. "The surgery, that loan, will be paid off by the trust," Marcus finished gently. "You should never have had to carry that burden alone." Henry stepped forward, his weathered face twisted with emotion. "Sir, are you saying, all those years, we had something coming to us?" "Yes." Marcus's voice was thick. "And I am so sorry it took this long." The room erupted. People were crying, laughing, embracing each other. Carla grabbed Grace's hands and squeezed them so hard it hurt. "You did this," Carla whispered. "You changed everything." "I didn't do anything," Grace protested. "Marcus found the documents. But you survived. You stayed. You told the truth when it would have been easier to disappear." Carla's eyes were shining. "That matters. Don't you dare say it doesn't." The meeting dissolved into chaos. After that, the good kind where people clustered around Marcus with questions, and Grace found herself pulled into one embrace after another. People she had worked alongside for years, people who had never spoken more than a few words to her, were suddenly treating her like family. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was the most beautiful thing Grace had ever experienced. Later that afternoon, when the crowd had finally dispersed and the estate had settled into a new kind of quiet, Grace found herself alone in the garden. She walked slowly toward the old oak tree, the place where she had sat in the rain just 24 hours ago. The ground was still damp from yesterday's storm. A few fallen leaves clung to the bark, but the sun was breaking through the clouds now, casting golden light across the grass. Grace touched the rough trunk of the tree, remembering how cold she had been, how hopeless, how certain that her life was about to fall apart. "Mama would be proud of you." She turned. Marcus was standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to startle you." "It's okay." Grace turned back to the tree. "I was just thinking about yesterday, about how different everything looks now." Marcus walked closer, standing beside her. "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "The lunchbox. That plastic container with rice and beans." He paused. "You were eating your lunch in a rainstorm and no one even noticed. No one cared." Grace shrugged. "That's just how it was." "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "That's how it should never be. Not here. Not anywhere." They stood in silence for a moment. Two people from completely different worlds, united by something neither of them could quite name. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said finally. "Anything. Why did you come outside last night when you saw me under the tree? You could have just gone inside. You could have let Eleanor handle it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you looked like someone who had given up. And I know what that feels like." He turned to face her. "After my mother died, I spent years feeling like nothing mattered. Like I was just going through the motions. I built walls so high that nothing could get in. Not joy, not pain, not anything." "What changed?" "You did." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "When I saw you sitting there in the rain holding that little lunchbox, something cracked inside me. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't pretend I didn't see you." Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Marcus smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "Just promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll never sit in the rain again. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel invisible. Promise me you'll fight for yourself the way you fight for your son." Grace looked at him, this man who had been a stranger yesterday, and somehow felt like something more today. She thought about all the promises she had made in her life to her mother, to Elijah, to herself. This one felt different. "I promise," she said. The sun broke fully through the clouds, then flooding the garden with warm golden light. And standing there beneath the old oak tree, Grace Thompson felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Not just hope, something deeper, something stronger. The beginning of a new life. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor's departure, and the Caldwell estate had transformed in ways Grace never could have imagined. The hallways felt lighter somehow, as if the very walls had been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. Staff members smiled now. They laughed in the kitchen. They greeted each other by name instead of passing like ghosts in silence. Grace arrived at the estate each morning at 8 o'clock sharp, no longer through the servants' entrance, but through the front door. Marcus had insisted. It had felt strange at first, almost wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes. But gradually, she had grown accustomed to it. Gradually, she had begun to believe she belonged. Her new office was on the second floor, a small room with a window overlooking the garden. It had been a storage closet before, filled with old furniture and forgotten boxes. Now it held a desk, a computer, and a filing cabinet filled with staff records that Grace was slowly organizing. On this particular Tuesday morning, she was reviewing the payroll adjustments when her phone buzzed. A text from Elijah's school. "Please call the main office regarding your son." Grace's heart stopped. She grabbed her phone and dialed immediately, her fingers trembling. "Hartford Elementary, how may I help you?" "This is Grace Thompson. I received a message about my son Elijah. Is he okay?" A pause. "Mrs. Thompson, Elijah is fine, but there's been an incident. We need you to come in as soon as possible." "What kind of incident?" Another pause, longer this time. It would be better if we discuss this in person. Grace hung up and stared at the phone in her hand. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was he hurt? Had he gotten into a fight? Had something happened to trigger his asthma? She grabbed her purse and rushed out of the office, nearly colliding with Marcus in the hallway. Grace, what's wrong? Elijah's school called. Something happened. I have to go. Marcus's expression shifted immediately from curiosity to concern. Take my car. It's faster. I can't take your... Grace. He caught her arm gently. Take the car. Go to your son. We'll figure everything else out later. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. 5 minutes later, she was speeding toward Hartford Elementary in Marcus's black Mercedes, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The school office was quiet when she arrived, just a secretary typing at her desk and a security guard standing near the door. But as soon as Grace identified herself, the atmosphere changed. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming so quickly. Principal Davies will see you now. Grace followed the secretary down a short hallway to a corner office. Inside, a gray-haired woman in a navy suit sat behind a large desk. And there, in a chair too big for his small body, sat Elijah. His face was streaked with dried tears, his shirt was torn at the collar, and there was a bruise forming under his left eye. Elijah! Grace dropped to her knees beside him, cupping his face in her hands. Baby, what happened? Who did this to you? Mama. His voice cracked. I didn't start it. I swear I didn't. Principal Davies cleared her throat. Mrs. Thompson, please have a seat. We need to discuss what occurred. Grace reluctantly released her son and sat in the chair beside him, keeping one hand firmly on his shoulder. There was an altercation during lunch period. The principal began. Elijah and another student, Tyler Morrison, got into a physical fight. Both boys have been suspended for 3 days. Suspended? Grace's voice rose. My son has never been in a fight in his life. What provoked this? Principal Davies hesitated. According to witnesses, Tyler made some comments about you, Mrs. Thompson. Comments that Elijah took offense to. Grace felt ice spread through her chest. What kind of comments? I don't think the specific words are, tell me. The principal sighed. Tyler said that Elijah's mother was a maid who cleaned toilets for rich people. He said other things as well, things I won't repeat in front of the child. Grace closed her eyes. She could imagine exactly what Tyler Morrison had said. She had heard those words before in different voices in different places. She had learned to swallow them, to pretend they didn't hurt, to keep moving. But Elijah was 7 years old. He didn't know how to swallow anything yet. Baby. She turned to her son, forcing her voice to stay calm. Is that what happened? Elijah's lip trembled. He said you were nobody, Mama. He said you were trash. He said his daddy told him that people like us don't belong in nice places. Tears spilled down his cheeks. I told him to stop. He wouldn't stop. And then he pushed me, and I hit him. Grace pulled him into her arms and held him tight, her own tears falling silently into his hair. Mrs. Thompson, Principal Davies said carefully, I understand this is difficult, but we have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. The suspension stands for both boys. Grace looked up, her jaw tight. And what about your policy on bullying, on hate speech, on teaching children that some people are worth less than others? The principal's expression flickered. We will be addressing Tyler's behavior as well. Will you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like my son defended himself against a bully who learned hatred from his parents, and now he's being punished equally with the child who attacked him. Mrs. Thompson. No. Grace stood, pulling Elijah close to her side. I understand you have rules, but I also understand that those rules don't seem to protect children like my son. We'll take the suspension, but I expect to see real consequences for Tyler Morrison, not just a conversation. She walked out without waiting for a response. In the car, Elijah sat silently in the back seat, staring out the window. Grace watched him in the rearview mirror, her heart breaking with every mile. "Mama." His voice was small. "Yes, baby." "Am I bad?" Grace pulled the car over immediately. She turned around in her seat to face him, her eyes fierce. "Listen to me, Elijah Thompson. You are not bad. You defended yourself. You stood up against someone who was saying cruel, ugly things. That took courage." "But I hit him." "You always said hitting is wrong." "Hitting is wrong when you do it to hurt someone for no reason. But protecting yourself when someone attacks you with words or with fists, that's different. You understand?" Elijah nodded slowly, but his eyes were still troubled. "Mama, is it true what Tyler said? That you clean toilets?" Grace felt the question pierce her like a knife. She reached back and took his hand. "I've cleaned a lot of things in my life, Elijah. Floors, windows, kitchens, bathrooms. Yes, toilets too. And you know what? I'm not ashamed of any of it. Every job I've ever done, I did it for you. So you could have food and clothes and a roof over your head. So you could go to school and become a doctor someday." "But Tyler said..." "Tyler's father is wrong. And Tyler is wrong. The value of a person isn't measured by the job they do. It's measured by how they treat others, by their kindness, by their courage." She squeezed his hand. "And by those measures, Elijah, you are worth more than Tyler Morrison will ever be." Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that shattered Grace's heart and rebuilt it at the same time. "I'm proud of you, Mama. I don't care what anyone says." Grace pulled him into the front seat and held him until both of them stopped crying. When they arrived back at the estate, Marcus was waiting at the front door. His expression shifted when he saw Elijah's bruised face. "What happened?" Grace shook her head slightly, signaling that she would explain later. "Elijah, this is Mr. Caldwell. He's my boss." Elijah looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. "You live in this big house?" "I do." Marcus crouched down to Elijah's level. "And you must be the young man who wants to be a doctor." Elijah nodded shyly. "That's a tough job. Takes a lot of studying. A lot of hard work." Marcus studied the boy's face. "Looks like you've been doing some hard work of your own today." Elijah touched his bruised eye. "A boy at school said mean things about my mama. I made him stop." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Did you now?" "Mama says I'm not bad for it. She says I was brave." "Your mama's right." Marcus stood up. "Brave people stand up for the people they love even when it's hard, even when there are consequences." He glanced at Grace, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Understanding, respect, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Why don't you come inside?" Marcus said. "I think there might be some cookies in the kitchen. And I have a library with some medical books if you're interested." Elijah's face lit up. "Real medical books with pictures of organs and stuff. The grossest pictures you've ever seen. Awesome." Grace watched her son follow Marcus into the house, chattering excitedly about the human heart, and felt something crack open inside her. This man, this billionaire who could have any life he wanted, was being kind to her child. Not because he had to, not because he wanted something, just because it was the right thing to do. She followed them inside, and for the next 2 hours, she watched Marcus show Elijah around the library, pointing out books on anatomy and surgery, explaining how the heart worked, answering every question with patience and genuine interest. Elijah was in heaven, and Grace was falling in love. She didn't realize it at first. It crept up on her slowly, like dawn breaking over the horizon. But by the time evening came, and Elijah had fallen asleep on the library couch exhausted from the day's emotions, Grace understood. She was in love with Marcus Caldwell. The thought terrified her. "He's a good kid." Marcus stood beside her, looking down at Elijah's sleeping face. "You've done an amazing job with him." "He's everything to me." Grace's voice was thick. "When I look at him, I see every sacrifice I've ever made, every long night, every skipped meal. And I know it was worth it." He sees you too, you know. Marcus turned to face her. When he talks about you, his whole face lights up. He doesn't see a maid or a cleaning lady. He sees a hero. Grace felt tears threatening again. I'm not a hero. I'm just a mother. Is there a difference? They stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound Elijah's soft breathing. Grace. Marcus's voice dropped. Can I tell you something? Of course. I've spent most of my life alone. By choice, I thought. I built walls because I didn't want to get hurt. I pushed people away because it was easier than letting them in. He paused. But these past few weeks with you, I've started to remember what it feels like to not be alone. Grace's heart pounded. Marcus, I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. You've changed something in me. You and Elijah both. And I'm grateful for it. Before Grace could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made her blood run cold. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. I know things about Marcus Caldwell that will destroy him. And I know things about you too, Grace Thompson. Things you thought were buried. Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts. It won't last long. Grace stared at the screen, her hands trembling. What is it? Marcus stepped closer. Grace, you've gone pale. Without a word, she handed him the phone. Marcus read the message, his expression hardening with every word. When he looked up, his eyes were blazing. Eleanor. It has to be. Grace's voice shook. Who else would? She's bluffing. She has nothing. But what if she does? What if there's something from my past? Something I don't even remember that she could use against me? Marcus took her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Whatever she thinks she has, whatever she's threatening, we will face it together. Do you understand? You're not alone in this. Grace wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that everything would be okay. But the fear coiling in her stomach wouldn't let go. Because she did have secrets. Things she had never told anyone. Things from before Elijah was born, before she moved to Connecticut, before she became the person she was now. And if Eleanor had found them? Grace looked at Marcus, at the man who had become her friend, her ally, maybe something more. And she wondered if he would still look at her the same way once he knew the truth. There's something I need to tell you, she whispered. Before she could continue, Elijah stirred on the couch. Mama, are we going home? Grace closed her eyes and took a breath. The confession would have to wait. Yes, baby, we're going home. But as she gathered her son in her arms and walked toward the door, she felt Marcus's eyes on her back. Questioning, worried, waiting. The storm wasn't over. Grace realized that now. Eleanor's departure had been the end of one battle, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere out there in the darkness beyond the estate's gates, an enemy was planning her next move. Grace held Elijah tighter and stepped into the night. Whatever came next, she would be ready. She had to be. The next morning came with a weight Grace hadn't felt since her darkest days. She had barely slept, her mind racing through every possibility, every secret she had buried, every skeleton that Eleanor might have unearthed. At 7 o'clock, she dropped Elijah at her neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Patterson, a retired schoolteacher who had watched him countless times before, took one look at Grace's face and pulled her into a hug. Whatever it is, baby girl, you're stronger than it. Grace wished she could believe that. By 8 o'clock, she was standing outside the Caldwell estate, her hands trembling as she typed a message to Marcus. We need to talk. It's about last night. His response came immediately. I know. Come to the study. When she entered, Marcus was already waiting. He wasn't sitting behind his desk like usual. He was standing by the window, his posture tense, a folder in his hand. Close the door, he said quietly. Grace did. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I got another message this morning. Marcus turned to face her. From Eleanor. She sent documents. Grace's stomach dropped. What kind of documents? Instead of answering, Marcus handed her the folder. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to run. She opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were police records, arrest records, a mugshot of a young woman barely recognizable with hollow eyes and tangled hair. The woman was Grace. That was taken 12 years ago, Grace whispered. Before Elijah. Before everything. I know. Marcus's voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Not anger, not disgust, something else. I read the report. Possession of a controlled substance. 6 months in county jail. Grace felt her legs give way. She sank into the nearest chair, the folder falling from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. I was 22, she said, her voice cracking. My mother had just died. I had nothing. No money, no family, no future. I fell in with people who told me they could help. They gave me something to make the pain stop. She looked up at Marcus, tears streaming down her face. I'm not that person anymore. I haven't touched anything since I found out I was pregnant with Elijah. He saved me. He gave me a reason to live. Marcus stood perfectly still. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. Because I was ashamed. Because I worked so hard to leave that life behind. Because I was terrified that if anyone knew, they would see me the way I used to see myself. Her voice broke completely. Worthless. Broken. Beyond saving. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides. He dropped to his knees in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. Look at me, Grace. She couldn't. The shame was too heavy. Grace, look at me. Slowly, painfully, she raised her eyes to meet his. What I see, Marcus said softly, is a woman who went through hell and came out the other side. What I see is a mother who rebuilt her entire life for her son. What I see is the strongest person I have ever known. Grace shook her head. You don't understand. This will ruin everything. Eleanor will go to the press. She'll tell everyone. Your reputation? I don't care about my reputation. Marcus? I care about you. He squeezed her hands tighter. I care about Elijah. I care about the life we're building here. And I will not let Eleanor Crane destroy any of it. Grace stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. How can you say that after everything you just learned? Because the past doesn't define you. Your choices today define you. The person you've become defines you. Marcus's voice was fierce. You think I don't understand making mistakes. You think I haven't done things I regret. We all have darkness, Grace. The difference is whether we let it consume us or whether we use it to become better. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Grace did something she had never done before. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes, letting herself be held without reservation. What are we going to do? She whispered. We're going to fight. Together. 2 hours later, Marcus's lawyer arrived at the estate. His name was David Chen, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had handled the Caldwell family's legal affairs for decades. Eleanor is threatening to release these documents to the press, Marcus explained, spreading the papers across his desk. She's demanding a settlement, $5 million and a public statement clearing her name. David studied the documents with a practiced eye. The arrest record is public information. She can release it whenever she wants. Grace felt sick. So there's nothing we can do. I didn't say that. David looked up. The question isn't whether she can release it. The question is whether anyone will care. Marcus leaned forward. Explain. Public opinion is fickle. Yes, this could hurt Grace's reputation initially, but context matters. A young woman who struggled with addiction after losing her mother, who turned her life around, who raised a child on her own, who was victimized by her employer and then rose above it. David smiled slightly. That's not a scandal. That's a redemption story. Grace felt a spark of hope flicker in her chest. You think people would see it that way? I think if we control the narrative, we can make them see it that way. We go public first. We tell your story on our terms. By the time Eleanor releases her documents, they're old news. Marcus nodded slowly. And what about Eleanor? Is there anything we can use against her? David's smile widened. Funny you should ask. I've been doing some digging since her termination. It turns out Eleanor has been quite busy over the past 16 years. He opened his briefcase and pulled out another folder thicker than the first. Falsified employment records. Misappropriated funds from household accounts. Suppression of the staff trust fund, which technically constitutes fraud. David slid the folder across the desk. And that's just what I found in 3 weeks. I suspect there's much more. Marcus's expression hardened. Enough to press charges. More than enough, if you want to go that route. Grace looked between the two men. Wait, are you saying Eleanor could go to prison? If the DA decides to prosecute, yes. The evidence is substantial. Grace thought about the woman who had tormented her for 2 years, who had made her sit in the rain, who had threatened her son's future, who was even now trying to destroy her life. Part of her wanted revenge. Part of her wanted Eleanor to suffer the way she had suffered. But another part of her, the part that had learned to survive by letting go, knew that revenge would only keep the wound open. I don't want to press charges, Grace said quietly. Both men stared at her. Grace, Marcus began, after everything she did. I know what she did. I lived it. Grace took a deep breath. But if I spend the rest of my life trying to punish her, then she wins. She stays in my head. She keeps controlling me. I want to move forward, not backward. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. It's your choice. But, Grace continued, I want her to know. I want her to know that we have this evidence. I want her to know that if she ever comes near me or my son or anyone at this estate again, we will use every single piece of it. David smiled approvingly. That can be arranged. The meeting with Eleanor took place 2 days later in a conference room at David Chen's law office. Grace insisted on being there. Marcus tried to argue, but she was firm. She tried to destroy me. I need to look her in the eye and show her that she failed. Eleanor arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, her silver hair swept back in its familiar severe bun. She walked into the conference room like she owned it, her chin high, her expression cold. But Grace noticed something she hadn't seen before, a tightness around Eleanor's eyes, a slight tremor in her hands. The armor was cracking. Let's make this quick, Eleanor said, taking her seat. I assume you're here to negotiate. We're here to inform you that negotiations are over. David slid a folder across the table. This contains evidence of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and falsification of documents spanning your 16-year tenure at the Caldwell estate. If any of this reaches the district attorney's office, you will face criminal charges. Eleanor's face went pale. She opened the folder, her hands shaking as she turned the pages. You can't prove any of this. We can prove all of it. Marcus's voice was ice. The altered trust documents are in your handwriting, Eleanor. The bank records show transfers to accounts you controlled. The falsified employment records bear your signature. Eleanor's composure shattered. For the first time, Grace saw the woman beneath the mask. Frightened, desperate, old. I gave 16 years to your family, Eleanor whispered. 16 years of loyal service. You gave 16 years of cruelty and manipulation, Marcus replied. You terrorized the staff. You stole from people who trusted you, and you tried to destroy an innocent woman to cover your own crimes. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing. Here's what's going to happen. You will withdraw your threats against Grace immediately. You will never contact anyone associated with this estate again. You will disappear quietly and completely. And in exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Grace stood up. She had been silent throughout the meeting, waiting. Now she walked around the table until she stood directly in front of Eleanor. "You told me once that truth doesn't matter in houses like this, that power matters." Grace's voice was steady. "You were wrong. Truth always matters, and power built on lies will always crumble." She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Eleanor could hear. "I'm not going to let you haunt me anymore. I'm not going to let your hatred poison my life. I'm free of you, Eleanor, and there's nothing you can do about it." Eleanor stared at her, speechless. Grace straightened up and walked out of the room without looking back. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. Her legs were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But for the first time since she could remember, she felt truly free. Marcus appeared beside her a moment later. "Are you okay?" Grace laughed, a sound somewhere between tears and triumph. "I think I am. I really think I am." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You were incredible in there. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear." He pulled back to look at her. "My mother used to say that. She sounds like a wise woman." She was. She would have loved you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Grace looked up at Marcus, at this man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up. "I love you," she said. The words came out before she could stop them, before she could second-guess herself, before the fear could swallow them back down. Marcus's eyes widened. For one terrible moment, Grace thought she had made a horrible mistake. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. "I love you too, Grace Thompson. I think I have since the moment I found you sitting under that oak tree." He kissed her, then right there in the hallway of a law office, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the distant sound of phones ringing somewhere down the hall. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And that made it everything. 6 months later, the Caldwell estate had been transformed. The East Wing, once used only for storage, now housed the Thompson Caldwell Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing education and job training for single parents. Grace stood at the window of her new office, watching Elijah play in the garden below. He was 9 now, still obsessed with medicine, still determined to become a heart doctor. But he was different too. More confident, more secure. He had friends now, real friends, and he no longer flinched when people asked about his family. The door opened behind her. Marcus entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Big day tomorrow," he said, handing her one. "I know." Grace took a sip. "I still can't believe it's happening." Tomorrow was the official launch of the foundation. They had spent months planning it, coordinating with schools and community centers across Connecticut. The first class of participants, 23 single mothers, would begin their training program next week. "You built this," Marcus said. "All of this. From nothing." "We built it. Together." He smiled and wrapped an arm around her waist. "I like the sound of that." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching their son chase butterflies across the lawn. "Mama, Marcus, come look." Grace laughed. "We're being summoned." They walked out into the garden together, hand in hand, as Elijah ran toward them with something cupped in his palms. "Look what I found. It's a caterpillar. It's going to turn into a butterfly." Grace crouched down to examine the fuzzy creature. "That's amazing, baby. You know, caterpillars have to go through a lot of change before they become butterflies." "I know." Elijah looked up at her with those bright, trusting eyes. "Just like you, Mama. You changed into something beautiful." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled her son into a hug, holding him tight against her chest. "We both did, baby. We both did." That night, after Elijah was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Grace walked out to the garden alone. She made her way to the old oak tree, the place where everything had changed. The bark was rough under her fingers. The branches swayed gently in the autumn breeze. And somewhere in the darkness, an owl called out its lonely song. Grace closed her eyes and thought about the woman she had been, sitting in the rain, eating cold rice, convinced that her life was over. She thought about her mother working herself to death in hotel rooms, never knowing that her daughter would one day stand where Grace stood now. She thought about Elijah, about the man he would become, about the lives he would save. And she thought about Marcus, about love found in the most unexpected places, about second chances and new beginnings. "Thank you," she whispered to the tree, to the night, to whatever force had brought her to this moment. "Thank you for not letting me give up." Footsteps approached from behind. Marcus appeared at her side, his shoulder brushing against hers. "I thought I'd find you here. I come here sometimes, when I need to remember." "Remember what?" Grace smiled. "That storms don't last forever. That the darkest nights eventually end. That no matter how lost you feel, there's always a way home." Marcus took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You are home, Grace, right here, right now. This is where you belong." She leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, his love. "I know," she said. "I finally know." Above them, the clouds parted to reveal a sky full of stars. The same stars that had watched over her on that terrible rainy night. The same stars that had witnessed her transformation, her triumph, her rebirth. Grace Thompson had walked through fire and emerged unburned. She had faced her darkest fears and conquered them. She had built a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a legacy worth leaving behind. And standing there under the oak tree, surrounded by everything she had worked so hard to create, she made one final promise. She would never sit in the rain again. She would never let anyone make her feel invisible. She would never stop fighting for the people she loved, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. True strength isn't about never falling down. True strength is about getting back up every single time, no matter how hard the world tries to keep you down. And Grace Thompson would keep getting up for the rest of her life. That was her truth. That was her power. That was her story. And it was only just beginning.